I'm not leaving. POTUS is leaving. He's not going to run for a second term. I'm going to run.
Yes! Wow. I did not see that coming.
That was Alita Meyer. She did with fire.
Bam!
Boom! Let's go to the fucking moon!
I was this close to living on my boat.
So that little clip that we just played for you, I think perfectly encapsulates the feeling that Kamala Harris and her team are feeling right now. Just overjoyed and ecstatic at the opportunity because Joe Biden has just announced that he is not going to be seeking a re-election for this upcoming general election. My name is Cooper Brown. I'm here with my good friend Zachary Groper. And Zach, we are living through a pretty historic time right now. It feels like every other day there are some big political headlines that are happening. I can barely keep up, and this is just another one thrown in the mix where Joe Biden is now dropping out of the race. The Democratic Party nominee, the president of the United States, is saying, I am not going to be attempting a second term. What are your first opinions on hearing this news?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's the fact that the Trump assassination attempt happened the week right before the Biden, him dropping out is just completely shocks me. It seems like we're living in a simulation. It seems so fake to be true, right? I mean, that being said, in regards to what you're talking about in the clip, I think the sentiments of Kamala is like, oh, this is like the only way I'm going to win anyway. Like, this is the only chance I got with nomination. So that's why she's so happy. But I think it's just the whole thing. It's a complete shit show for the Democrats right now, in my opinion. I think they're, scrambling to find a candidate. And I mean, Kamala is obviously the only logical choice because she's a VP at this moment. But I think it's going to be really hard for her to have a chance against Trump, especially considering how Kamala was in the debate even against Mike Pence.
Point. When you were DA in San Francisco, when you left office, African Americans were 19 times more likely to be prosecuted for minor drug offenses than whites and Hispanics. When you were Attorney General of California, you increased the disproportionate incarceration of blacks in California. Yeah. You did nothing on criminal justice reform in California. You didn't lift a finger to pass the First Step Act on Capitol Hill. I mean, the reality is your record speaks for itself.
Imagine what a Kamala debate against Donald Trump would be like.
I really can't wait for that moment because that'll be pure comedy gold to see that happen. But really, I do agree with you that the Democratic Party is kind of lost right now. There's really two possible options that they have right now is they can either just go with Kamala Harris, the VP, or they can have an open primary and have a bunch of people throw their hats in the ring. But that's going to create a lot of chaos and probably more division in the party. And we honestly don't have enough time for them to really consolidate that and get around one individual person. So in my opinion, it's probably going to just have to be Kamala Harris, which I was rooting for Joe Biden not to drop out because I thought, he's been performing so badly these last few weeks. I was really hoping to see him and Donald Trump go at it a second time, but I'll take Kamala Harris, I suppose. Though the real question, I think, is going to be potential VP picks for her. Obviously, it also makes more sense financially because Biden and the Harris ticket have already raised so much money that is something that Kamala Harris is able to utilize. I believe over $90 million. If it was a new candidate, all that money would have been frozen. So I think it just makes for a better transition to have Kamala Harris be that candidate. She slightly outperforms Joe Biden in the national polls and in some swing states, but it's going to be very, very similar. And that's all taken place without her being in the limelight as the presidential nominee. I cannot imagine the type of ads that Donald Trump are going to come out just destroying Kamala Harris. And those also, I think, are going to be comedy gold.
I mean, I don't think we have to talk about it because I think everyone knows about Kamala's history. But like the fact that you're talking about Trump ads, like the fact of how she made her positions in terms of you could say sleeping her way to the top. I mean, figuratively, literally is what happened. So I think that's something Trump could definitely use, and I think that's something she can't really avoid. But I mean, to scramble even for potential. I mean, to me, to scramble for potential presidential candidates, it's almost impossible. I know there's open primaries; they say it's going to happen, but I think it's the only thing that makes really sense right now. I think given the fact that all the fundraising has done with the super PACs and everything has gone for the the Biden Harris ticket, it would make no sense to have a new candidate, especially since considering the fact that they have no consistent plan on how to deal with Trump, because I mean they can't really deal with Trump.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, I've never seen a political candidate or individual fail so much and literally end up in a hair's breadth away from the presidency. Like, that is an absurd thing that Kamala Harris is just, this roller coaster that she's been on is wild. And it's unbelievable how much a person can fail at their job so hard and almost be the most powerful person in the world. But in any case, I do agree that the best and smoothest transition will be just to accept Kamala Harris. But then that leaves the question of who's the potential VP pick. I think there's a couple interesting names being thrown around strategically, where you might go for someone like a Josh Shapiro type. He's the governor of Pennsylvania. He would probably likely help Kamala Harris take the state of Pennsylvania. There's, for example, the governor of Michigan. She's also an example of someone that could possibly do the same thing. But now you're having a double female ticket, and I don't know if America's really ready for that. But there are a lot of strategic options available. If I was a Democrat, I wouldn't want to touch this campaign with the 10-foot pole, because I think there's just too high likelihood that there's not enough time and things are going to crash and burn so dramatically. I don't want the chance of ruining my career and a potential shot at the nomination in 2028 to try and ruin it right now, when there's only 3 months left until November. And so there's really not a whole lot of time. And if they are going to do a primary, they got to get through it really, really fast. But I honestly don't think that'll be the case.
I think something we haven't really mentioned about this is that the Biden resigning, and I mean, we could say the factors that really took place that led to it. Obviously, the media pressure and people like Shifty Schiff, and obviously Adam Schiff. I love saying Shifty Schiff for some reason. And Nancy Pelosi going against Biden is really what led him to make this decision. But what we didn't really take into consider the fact is that he still has until January to screw up the country more. So it's like, and it pretty much admit his cognitive failures by conceding this over at this moment. He's practically admitting it. So what's going to happen? That's what my question is. Is there going to be a 25th Amendment evoked? Because at this situation, we're looking at any possibilities, because he's still a president, even though that happened.
Well, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, did just recently come out and say Joe Biden needs to step down from president. If he's not capable of running for an election, he definitely is not capable of running for president. In my opinion, I actually don't like this idea, because then that means Kamala Harris will be president. And call me crazy or selfish, but when I see the line of presidents going down from George Washington all the way to today, I do not want to see Kamala Harris's face on that list. There's something about it. It sickens me. It just hurts me to the core. I don't want to see that happening, even though it makes the logical sense, absolutely. But on a personal level, I don't want to see that happen.
No, I can imagine all the founding fathers with their serious faces, and you see Kamala with a big smile, and there. I mean, that would be pretty funny. But I mean, Trump, in response to it, I have to admit, he said the most brutal thing on Truth Social, and I'm gonna read it out now. I thought it was honestly kind of hilarious. But he said, "It's not over. Tomorrow, crooked Joe Biden's going to wake up and forget that he dropped out of the race today." I mean, honestly, I wouldn't put it past it.
Which Donald Trump did call it. There's that hilarious video of someone filming him on the golf course, and he said, "Oh, Joe Biden's not going to make it. It's going to be Kamala Harris." And she's so terrible, and that hilarious video. So a lot of us kind of had the idea. I was hoping that it wouldn't come down to this. I was really hoping that Joe Biden would stick it out to the end, because I wanted to see Donald Trump beat Joe Biden specifically. And I think at this point, just because Joe Biden had such a terrible month, I think he had the greatest chance of losing to Donald Trump. There are a ton of polls that go out that have this race actually fairly competitive more than I would actually feel comfortable with. Nationally, Donald Trump is only getting about, I believe it's 47% of the national polls, and that is not great numbers compared to Kamala Harris right now, which I believe is at 45 or 46, whichever, depending on what you're looking at. And that is something that should not make Republicans or conservatives comfortable. That means that this is way too close to call and that you still need to be putting on the pressure. And don't take any of this lightly, and don't take this for granted that, oh, just because Kamala Harris is one of the worst talking politicians I've ever seen and is one of the most hated politicians, probably just slightly over Hillary Clinton, then this is no give me election, and you need to pull out all the guns for this.
I mean, I think in particular the Democratic Party, it doesn't really matter who you put in front of the ticket. It's just going to be the Democratic Party representing all the interests of the party member, and all their, you could say hardliners will support it, but I think a lot of even, moderate Democrats would support a candidate unless they're like AOC. I think a situation where they'd go against the Democratic Party would be slim. So that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And like, what's something Kamala has that, like you would argue makes her different than, another candidate? Or, okay, what, obviously the failure she had with the border crisis. I mean, that's one thing I think a lot of Americans won't forget. And there's another interesting thing that her anti-fracking policies obviously will be horrible in the Sun Belt in terms of the swing states that are generally swing between Democrats and Republicans, in Pennsylvania, Ohio, all those different states. But let's say, what makes her a candidate that might be, good? Like what's favorable to her, maybe to a Democratic base, you would say?
Well, apparently she pulls well against blacks. I've never had a black person that says they enjoy Kamala Harris, but apparently she does better, which makes sense.
Yeah.
I honestly think that when you look at most polls will do they'll be about individuals, so they'll be Trump versus Biden, and then they'll also do Trump versus generic Democrat or Biden versus generic Republican. And generally those polls outperform the generic candidate because people are able to kind of imagine the candidate they want to pursue. And I think that the Democratic Party has been looking at those polls and saying, okay, the generic Democrat outperforms and sometimes beats Donald Trump in many of these states and states that they really have to win. And I think that it kind of just drove them to say Biden is unwinnable. Kamala Harris at least has a better chance than this. So we're just going to have to go with our second option and just hopefully make this transition as smooth as possible. All the people that we were mentioning before, like the Josh Shapiros and even the Gavin Newsoms, who are potential VP picks, they have all come out and endorsed Kamala Harris. So it's likely that she will just be the nominee and that we won't have to go through a potential disaster mid primary. But I think at this point, they're all vying for a VP pick, which again, in my opinion, I think has too great a risk of this ending in a disaster just because there's not enough time. And Kamala Harris is such a terrible candidate.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, tell me what you think of this, because also recent news, the JD Vance VP pick from Trump just happened. And I was wondering, do you think a Kamala strategy like Trump would be interesting or help her in any way? Because JD Vance obviously represents a hardworking background, but also he's a millennial. So he's a young person, because I think that is important in terms of Trump's image as this old man, right? To have a young person on a VP ticket is essential for his election. Do you think maybe perhaps Kamala Harris could do something on her side to have someone that would help her? Obviously, a lot of Americans are not fans of Kamala Harris, but let's say they put Gavin Newsom, who is a politician's politician. I think we can all agree that. I dislike Gavin Newsom. I know you do as well. But he is a very good politician and would appeal to a lot of mainstream Democratic voices. So do you think that can impact, perhaps give her a better chance coming against Trump? Now, obviously, she doesn't make a strong leader herself, but having a strong VP can really impact in case, they make a switch up right before the election happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can tell exactly what demographic or message a president or a candidate wants to convey based on their VP pick. And so you're exactly right that JD Vance was absolutely picked because I think he's a millennial and he's young. He's very Trumpian and he can kind of carry the torch once Trump only has 4 more years left if he becomes president again. He is able to pass that baton. He's very young, and so that covers that kind of politics are for old people and all these politicians are in their 80s type of argument. And I think Kamala Harris will have to do the exact same thing with her VP pick. I don't think it'd be a Gavin Newsom. I think Gavin Newsom is too hated amongst all of the other states, minus California. And he's a little too radical. I think you need someone really, really moderate. And so that's why I would say like a Shapiro would probably be the best choice, because he is a fairly well-respected governor in Pennsylvania. But if I was him, I wouldn't want to be a part of it. But you might think you need to strike when the iron's hot, but that's just my personal opinion. But absolutely, the pick that she will make will absolutely give clear idea of what thought process she's thinking and what demographic specifically she's trying to target when it comes November.
I think, and this is my opinion, and, maybe you could comment, like, see if you think it's the case. But I think kind of what happened with Biden, I mean, this is obviously a trend that's been taking place for a while, but what happened, it kind of shows the decline of a party and it needs a rebranding. Obviously, I think, because you have one end, a man, who can't really talk in his 80 years old. But then the other hand, you have someone like AOC who appeals to a complete radical fringe of a population. And they don't have a consistent, no, they obviously have a consistent platform, but they also have something that's, kind of intolerable to a lot of Americans, like the transgender ideology, like, the race politics. So does this kind of show kind of like a necessary rebranding for the Democratic Party? Do you think perhaps, Joe Biden leaving might lead to the Democratic Party changing platforms? Because you mentioned someone like Josh Shapiro, a moderate. Perhaps they might, take a different stance in terms of election, because I argue Trump is a reaction to, the left's ludicrous, behavior. And I think that's what you could definitely see with, all of Biden's presidency.
If they were smart, they absolutely would. They would definitely ignore their radical base and shift back towards the center, which is partly why they're losing so badly in this election, is because Joe Biden ran in 2020 as a moderate, but he governed as an extreme Bernie Sanders-like radical.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid that any Democratic individual that becomes president are going to do the exact same thing. They'll say they're conservative, they'll have one type of policy, but then once they're in office, they'll push themselves way radical. Same thing Barack Obama did in 2008 and 2012. And so at this point, I think any Democratic individual became president, they're going to placate to that radical base. And it's going to cost them a lot of elections, in my opinion, as they move further and further more progressive. But that is close to the amount of time that I think we have. One little last treat that I think we want to leave you is just a little compilation of all the intellectual diamonds that come out of Kamala Harris's mind, that she has been sharing with us for the last 3 years, as she's been vice president.
Remember Venn diagrams, those 3 circles? Right. And then let's just see where they overlap. You will not be surprised because I have constructed a Venn diagram on this. Remember those 3 circles, how they overlap? I love Venn diagrams. So I just do. Whenever you're dealing with conflict, pull out a Venn diagram, right? And so, the 3 circles. The television coverage of just yesterday, that's on top of everything else that we know and don't know yet, based on what we've just been able to see. And because we've seen it or not doesn't mean it hasn't happened, but just limit it to what we have seen.